doing their washing that's in Mariupol, and the water is water that comes from the water provision system in June or July. So the water was reestablished in Mariupol, but could not flow through the system under Russian occupation. The system had not been repaired, and so they're living on the streets. I mean, I guess you've seen many of these pictures. But what's important to remember at this stage are the first days of the Mariupol siege, when a power substation north of the city was destroyed, and then by domino effect, within hours, the city was left, or large parts of the city, without water and electricity. Without electricity, first of all, which meant without pumping systems for the water, without elevators to get to the last floors, elderly people who could not walk down steps, who were basically left on the 6th floor as in a coffin unless their neighbors would help them. All this to show to what extent water and electricity and the companies that provided, which are utilities, right, have an essential role to play to keep social order, right? I guess you can relate to the fact that if from one day to the next you do not have any drinking water and are drinking it out of the heating system, how long will you resist in face of aggression, right? If you're offered a bottle of water. So this is just to show you the extreme case, and so that's why I'm interested in this question. Is what is the connection between utilities? Citizenship, sovereignty, all those aspects, and there are clues actually. There are clues as to why this question is an interesting one. Here, very quickly, but I'm not going to comment because I don't have time. But this is just the overview of the infrastructure damages. Partially after this week's attacks by Russia. Just to remind you that there are large-scale attacks on infrastructure for the reasons that I just mentioned. But okay, this is the clue. In the spring of 22, the mayor of Kherson at this point was already occupied by Russian troops. The mayor's office, the local administration were occupied, but Mayor Igor Kalakayev continued his work in the city, refused to leave the city, going against direct orders from the head of the military administration, and saying that Kherson is Ukrainian as long as there are Ukrainians working and living there, and that his duty was to his citizens, and that this made it a Ukrainian city. So Igor Kalakayev was then later kidnapped and has disappeared. It's very unclear what happened to him. But he was attacked for being a collaborator, for taking this position. So there is this kind of tension and dilemma around the question of essential utilities. What do they mean in relation to sovereignty? It's a question of legitimacy too. And whether or not the consumers, the citizens, accept the legitimacy of the state, and that makes sovereignty. Utilities are usually perceived as public service organizations and as kind of informal extensions of the state. I'll go back to this in the questions and answers, but a lot of this is based on my previous research in the Donbass when I was studying water infrastructure system across the front line. And why is it not going forward? Here, there we go. Sorry. I'm sorry. There. Okay, but I was speaking about clues, right? Sovereignty, legitimacy, and clues about it. So this is kind of a self-made map. Well, it's based on OpenStreetMap that has a special map on infrastructure, and all these little red, black, blue lines are the way these places are connected. Now the gray zone underneath is more or less the occupation zone. It's really like colored by myself, so it's maybe a bit imprecise. And the major places that I've been trying to study, most of them over internet sources, to see what kind of positions were taken by the Russian occupiers, by Ukrainian authorities there or in exile, by consumers and by utilities themselves, and partially also based on my field work in the Donbass. I wasn't in the occupied parts, but I was speaking to the managers of a water supply company that was working on both sides. And so what keeps coming back is this connection. For instance, I'll just mention Zaporizhia, that you can see in the middle and the bottom of the map, because the Zaporizhia power plant has been in so much in the news and so central to everything. So what you see on this map and these important clues is, for one, is the interconnectedness, right? That the occupied territories and the free territories are actually connected through utility system. It's also true in Donbass with water. The Zaporizhia plant is providing electricity to occupied territories. It is dependent on and to Ukraine overall, but is also dependent on for its cooling system on electricity generated in Dnipro. So this is all it's all interconnected. So there's a spatial aspect that is interesting and important. Here I'll also get back to the conceptual framework later. So what I'm trying to do is try to understand if we suppose that there is a connection between utilities, new forms of alternative sovereignty, and let's say the immediate the immediate actors in this, consumers, local authorities, and utilities. How does it play out? And so what I found and what I'm trying to study and will develop in the question answers is how practices, especially corporate practices and cultures within the utility system, might be clues as how new connections are made, and that these connections are not only about corporate belonging, but also about Ukrainian bonds. Thank you.